Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Engineering Future podcast. I'm your host, Luis Duque, and today I bring a conversation with Catherine Martsolf. She is an environmental engineer that is doing a lot of great things, helping men understand our role as members of society by empowering women in engineering. So she's the founder of HeForSWE, which is an affinity group of the Society of Women Engineers, which help men understand and create a more inclusive environment at our jobs, at college, and everywhere we see men working as engineers. So it was great talking to her, great to hear her perspective on this topic. She has some really great advice for other men in engineering to help promote and empower women engineering. And this is a topic that we've been talking about for quite a while now on this podcast. So it was great to complement that episode with all the past episodes with this one, and just hearing from Catherine from her perspective as a young engineer. And she actually just shared some incredible stories of personal experiences that she lived through, being discriminated by more senior engineers and being discriminated by other men in the profession. So make sure you stick around for this episode. It was great talking to her, and it was great to hear all the things that she's doing to promote women engineering through these organizations. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the newsletter, go to luisfelipeduque.com/newsletter. It's been growing. We've been sharing a lot of great content and sharing a lot of great advice with you, and it's been powerful to just create a more direct connection between you, the listener of the show, and me, who is trying to help you through content and through answering questions that I know you want to have answered. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe if you are not. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show. It really helps get the word out there and really helps the show continue growing and continue evolving into a show that hopefully is bringing a lot of value to you. Welcome to the Engineering Our Future podcast, a podcast where I bring you relevant content from personal experience and guests to help young engineers, students, and international students succeed in their careers. Welcome everyone to an episode of the Engineering Our Future podcast. Today I have with me Catherine. She is doing a lot of great things in engineering, and I just wanted to get a conversation with her. Do you mind just give us a little introduction and some of the things you are working on?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine. I'm an environmental engineer in the government sector. Right now, I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So go Eagles, go all of the Philly sports teams. And right now in Society Women Engineers, I'm exiting, closing out my first year of being co-chair and co-founder of the HeForSWE affinity group in Society of Women Engineers. And I'm also involved in American Society of Civil Engineers and the Environmental Water Resource Institute. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had Danielle a few months ago. I'm pretty sure you know who she is. She's very involved with SWE and ASE and everything. And I thought this was a perfect kind of follow up to that episode, because I think the role that HeForSWE has in our profession, it's really important. So for the people that don't really know what HeForSWE is, can you just give us a little overview and some of the things you've been doing with this organization?
Sure. So HeForSWE is the Society of Women Engineers version of HeForShe in the United Nations. And it's basically a watering hole or community, within Society of Women Engineers that is dedicated towards inspiring and advancing allies and making sure that male diversity partners in particular, you don't have to be male, but we would prefer having a lot of male diversity partners in engineering to advocate for your women, your counterparts, your fellow women engineers. So that's the mission of HeForSWE.
And why did you decide to start that? Did you see there was a need for such organization? And I know as men, we could do better at promoting other women in engineering. I know every time I talk with someone in this podcast about this topic, there is always a consensus that yes, men should be doing a little better. So, why did you wanted to start this? I wouldn't say a new organization, but this kind of affinity group within SWE.
That's a good question, because I think I was in high school when Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg came out. And Lean In was basically talking about how it's not only the women's part to advance women equality, but also it's important for men to also be having that as their personal mission too. So that's what the first inspiration came from. It was like lean in and he for she. And then when I was in college, I was president of my SWE section, Temple University. Go Owls. And we started a HeForSWE program because Cal Poly Pomona SWE had a HeForSWE. And we thought it would be so helpful for our campus in particular, because whenever we wanted to get more members or whenever we wanted the college to be involved in SWE, a lot of the guys, quote unquote guys, would cross their arms. They wouldn't be interested in SWE. They would think, oh, there's woman in the title. Why should I be joining SWE? And that's the opposite of the brand or the image SWE would want to have. It's not, this is only for women. It's that the mission is to advance women, but that doesn't mean it's a woman-only mission. It should be everyone's missions for having kind of equal representation. That's where it started.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you were part of like different diversity and inclusion groups within ASE and more specifically with SWE. Where does that passion for diversity and inclusion come from, and how this group have maybe opened your eyes to new perspective that maybe you didn't see before? I know women engineering is kind of it's hard to relate sometimes because there's not a lot of role models for minorities, and I just want to hear how you find those role models, or how have you become a role model for someone else in your career?
That's a good question. So along the line of, I guess, how it started, I was thinking of who could I bring on board with me to start this affinity group, and it was the one and only Ken Fulmer. He's the president and CEO of Urban Engineers, and their headquarters is in Philly. He has been such an inspiring mentor, and he's always advocated for my development and my growth, even though he's not my direct employer. So it's really exciting to see another civil engineer inspiring and advocating for a younger female engineer. So that's, I guess, where the mission came from and where I found my own role model, and how HeForSWE, I guess, began in the terms of that, finding a role model. But in general, I guess before college, I was just interested in the environment, and I realized that environmental scientists, there seemed to be a lot of women involved in biology and the human sciences and biological sciences. And I saw environmental engineering, and only 20% of women are 20% of engineers are women. So that was kind of perplexing to me, why there was some disconnect that once you threw engineering in the title, suddenly there was a drop in women. So that's where it came from. And my passion for equality, I guess, came from in STEM. And in American Society of Civil Engineers, right now, currently, I'm on Members of Society Advancing an Inclusive Culture. We call it Mosaic. And Louise, we would love to have you. We would love to have as much as we can, as many members as we can, join in and tell us about their experiences. And for that area of advancing, I guess, minorities and advancing equality and equity, we have been discussing how to make conferences, how to make any kind of programming that ASE puts on equitable and accessible to everyone. And we are putting out resources for local sections and the regions to make sure all their programming is equitable and accessible. So it would be anything small from make sure you're using photos that don't just show white men, for example. That's just an example. And making sure that you're being aware of people who may be hard of hearing or who may be disabled, something like that. So that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's super important. And I know this past year there was a lot of conferences, a lot of talks, a lot of people kind of going towards a more inclusive environment with everything that was going on in the past, 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, how have you seen this kind of affinity group from SWE help maybe men be more aware of that there are a ton of women in engineering, and it's a profession that it's diverse. There are people from all different backgrounds. Have you seen a direct correlation between what you guys are doing and starting this group and kind of to motivate new men to become involved in engineering and promoting women in engineering? Have you seen like an improvement in that sense? I don't know if you have any statistics or anything, but just a feel of, yes, we've seen a little more improvement with this new group.
That's a great question because we're always asking ourselves how we can measure our progress. So before HeForSWE was an affinity group, and it was grassroots. Even prior to that, there was a group in Society of Women Engineers that had moved into the Senate. But at the time, I think it was 2015, and I was still in college. And I had attended a Region E SWE conference, and they were hosting a committee meeting, and it was open to any member. So I just walked on in, and it was called Strategic Initiatives Committee. And I was part of the team that published a white paper and put together a Man as Diversity Partners playbook for the organization. So the HeForSWE initiative really started there, I would say. It started a long time ago. And I unfortunately haven't seen as much progress as I would like to see in terms of men really trying to be involved in SWE. I have seen a lot of men involved in WTS, which is Women Transportation Seminar. And I always kind of wonder what they do differently, or what the image or anything gets getting lost in communication with that. So I guess I'm paralleling with WTS. I'm really
Mhm.
trying. But the HeForSWE affinity group was founded in July of 2020. So it hasn't been a long time, and we have had some newsletters with both professionals and very experienced professionals and college students come up to us and say they're interested in being involved, and they support women in engineering, and they would like to inspire their peers to be involved. So hopefully we'll see something come out of that. The We 20 annual conference, at the We 20 annual conference, HeForSWE had a presentation, and that was really exciting to actually see the general male members who are just going to the conference for the conference, the sake of the conference, join in and realize that HeForSWE might be something that they would want to get involved in. So hopefully we'll see more men at conferences. Hopefully we'll see more professional sections in particular taking on this ambassador program. Seeing what they do with it will be really exciting because we are in, I guess, the infancy stage of the affinity group and the resources that we put out. And SWE HQ currently has all the affinity groups on Facebook. So file sharing on Facebook can be a little difficult, and
Yeah.
resource sharing, but we're really trying. We have an Instagram. We're getting it all out there, all the resources.
I didn't realize it just started last year. For like, maybe it was just kind of local thing for universities, but I thought there was a group at the university I went to. Is that correct? Is
Yes.
that how it kind of started, maybe at the national level?
Yes, that's correct. So it was grassroots before it was an affinity group. And I had heard about it from Cal Poly Pomona. I don't, in my mind, they're the original creators of the movement. But it certainly started as grassroots. So the collegiate sections, Temple had one, Manhattan College had one. I think they still do. Drexel has one. Drexel has a great one. And Ken Fulmer, the co-founder of HeForSWE Affinity Group, is a graduate of Drexel. And he tells me all the time he would have
Mhm.
loved to join SWE when he was in college if it were the status quo. So it certainly did start out as a grassroots and in collegiate sections.
Yeah, I just remember just kind of seeing it. I wasn't really involved within the group or anything, but I just remember hearing about it. So I was really surprised when you said it just started last year. Um,
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask you, and I've asked other people on this podcast before, is how can men better promote women engineering? How can we do better at just kind of promoting and helping create awareness towards the diverse profession that we have?
That's a good question. And HeForSWE, that's our aim at providing resources that answer that question. There are a few ways. So the first way, I guess, if you are in college, join your SWE section,
Mhm.
figure out what it feels like. At Temple SWE, one of our HeForSWE ambassadors was attending a general body meeting, and he was so terrified to enter the room because it was all women. And that was our little gotcha moment where we were like, now you kind of see what we feel. So that would be the first step, is to really understand the mission of SWE. And if you're not open to that, you're not open to that. But I would really hope that if you start at the collegiate level, you really get a sense of understanding of what barriers women face in engineering. It's not very simple, they're always complex, especially if there's intersectionality there. So I would first start out going to your SWE meetings, hear about what their experiences are like in the classroom. So if you hear, for example, in your collegiate section that a professor told a female student that her handwriting was too flowery, I was one of those. If you hear that, then speak up and say that's inappropriate. And, there's a power dynamic there, but just learn to speak up when you hear those sorts of things, because sometimes you don't hear them because you're worried about your test or something like that. And then if you are a young professional, if you're working within a team, I would say make sure to create an environment in which everyone is having equal say. So if you realize that one person is speaking up a lot and solutions are based on solutions are based on diversity of thought, if you realize that someone else isn't speaking as often as the other people, try to ask them a direct question and get them involved. And it's all about being aware. And if you are an experienced professional, what we went over at the We20 conference was data about how people think that they're active allies until they realize they're not. So even if you're an experienced professional and you think you're doing everything you can about mentoring, it's really important to find proteges, which means you're not just mentoring someone, you're invested in their growth and there's a symbiotic relationship. So it's not just one way. And in that sense, it's finding proteges that are different and trying to groom everyone, I guess, and making sure that you're not just focusing on one group of people. And those are just a few ways.
Yeah, I think what you just said is really important because in my mind, as men and as women, we should gravitate towards creating friendship with other men. In my case, other women in your case, and it's really hard to cross that barrier and kind of break that bias unless you are conscious about it. So I know for me, like before, I just used to follow a lot of male engineers or a lot of male people on Instagram and all the social media, but that was just me being biased towards the gender that I am, and I wanted to connect with them. But once I realized that I was following all these men on social media and realized that I wasn't really following too many women in social media, that's when you start realizing that you do have bias, even if you don't think you have them. And it's hard to break that barrier of understanding and realizing that you could do better at maybe creating a more diverse environment. And I always say, and other people have said it here on the podcast too, it all starts from the classroom, or it all starts from your company, and you being active and being proactive on calling out people that is not promoting an inclusive environment. So I think that's very true, and I know a lot of people have experienced horrible things during their careers and even like early on in their careers. So I'm very happy that there is a group that is promoting um, men helping women in engineering, because there is really a need for that.
That's a
And
great point. If
go
I
ahead.
could interject,
No, go ahead.
your point about unconscious bias is really important, and it's something I haven't even brought up yet. And it's so important to note that in HeForSWE, we don't even delve into addressing unconscious bias because it's so hard to look yourself in the mirror and say, "This is what you're biased about," and this is you should get out of that. It's hard to look yourself in the mirror and say that. So that's a really great point.
So yeah, it's hard to realize it because we need to be humble enough to acknowledge that we have those biases towards anything in life. Uh, Maybe like expand a little bit on what have you seen men do, and maybe even women do, that we can change to create a more inclusive environment at work, the classroom, or basically anywhere else.
That's a great question. So the multiplier effect by Cisco is a great example of a protege mentor program within a pretty big company. So I look at that as the format and the template to really go into my own company or my own firm and talk to people and say, we should have this program. It's not just a mentoring program, it's a protege program. So I always look towards the Cisco multiplier effect as a great example. And in particular, there was an instance I had in ASCE in a section that I'm no longer a part of, but it was essentially me, a young, not very pale engineer, going up towards a group of 10 older, all men pretty much, engineers who are white men. And I felt kind of a fish out of water, and I was going up to them to discuss creating their technical group into a chapter. At the time, it was any other technical group that you would find. It wasn't a specific one. I won't name it. But in that conversation, it started to turn into, oh, who is this person? Who is this Catherine? Why is she coming up to us and telling us we need to become an institute for the better of the society and the organization? And they had been involved in ASE for a very long time, so they had seniority. And it turned into, bullying and name calling, and it turned into like, oh, she's a steamroller. This isn't how we work. This isn't. And meanwhile, they all voted, so I didn't really worry about trying to sell them on anything. It seemed like they were buying into it and they were supportive of it, until it turned into, oh, we're all kind of outdated in our thinking. And one of the ASCE national presidents from a long time ago had stepped in and had said, this is inappropriate language, that you shouldn't be talking to a younger member this way. And he understood that for me to approach this group in general was a big stride of confidence there. It would have been very difficult. And that's the example I use to show that, you can be an older white male and identify bullying and inaccessible accessibility barriers when you see them. And it's your opportunity to speak up if you can. So I always look towards that past ASCE national president as a great example. And Ken Fulmer as well. He's advocated for me often and developed me, and he's fantastic. So those are the kind of examples that I always point towards. And at the collegiate level, there are really great HeForSWE directors and ambassadors in Cal Poly Pomona. There was one we just had recently from Cal Poly, but it wasn't the Pomona campus. And he's fantastic. There are so many college students who are really just, I don't know, the next generation, or, the younger people seem to be really on top of this. And there are really a lot of great ones in the college sections right now. So I'm really proud of them. Yeah. I point towards them as an example.
Yeah. And so an example that I have actually recently experienced is I'm in a committee with, 15, 20 people, very diverse committee, a lot of women, a lot of men and women of color, and obviously white men that are very senior. And something that really stuck to me is this one guy, I won't say his name. He's pretty senior. He's a professor, and he is definitely a white male and a majority for in engineering. And he always comes back to mentioning and trying to understand where all these people from these groups come from, women, younger engineers like me, and everything. And always, even though if he may not agree immediately, just because there may be some unconscious bias, as we have talked about here, he's always trying to look from a different perspective. So that's something I have really valued from him, just realizing that even though he believes in something right now, he knows that may not be true, and then he may have some unconscious bias, and always having the open mind of understanding that he may believe that right now, but that may not be the right standpoint, kind of looking at the bigger picture. So like it's hard to be in that position of someone that has believed something for so long and then being challenged all of a sudden by younger engineers like us, and realizing that there is a new generation of engineers, and there's new perspective and understanding that engineering is an evolving profession that we need to kind of change our mindset very often to accommodate for societal issues, technical issues, and everything. So it really stuck to me the way he was approaching the conversations and realizing that he may have some unconscious bias and always trying to look from different perspectives. And I wonder if with your experience, for example, it really stuck to me because I wonder if those experiences from other engineers may have just shut them down immediately and just closed the doors for anything they could have done in the future. And we're missing really valuable and really talented engineers that could become the leaders of the profession. So I'm wondering, what's your perspective on that? Like, how do you see those older and more senior engineers maybe shutting down younger engineers and not giving the opportunity to develop into the future leaders that we can become?
That is a very good question. And I need to have the name of that person who is addressing their own unconscious bias and being a really great leader. That is a wonderful example of what a HeForSWE ambassador really is. In my own experience, I'm trying to think of things that could help. For people who think certain things for a long period of time, they almost become, I think, gun shy. If you think like a certain thing all the time and you've lived a long time, you've probably reaffirmed that over and over again, that stereotype, let's say. So I don't mean to think that they're a lost cause, but in my mind, I think I would hope that it's never too late. But in my experience, I think the younger generation is really taking everything in stride a little bit more. And that's not to say that the more senior engineers who are not very forward thinking in their leadership style have anything to offer, because they do. We can learn from the past. This is helpful. But in my experience, it's been the younger engineers and the little shining beacons of hope that was in your meeting, and Ken Fulmer and a past ASCE president for me. I want to say, though, for SWE, sometimes a lot of people think that women are catty and that we like to take down each other. And there are some women who might be senior who feel threatened by another, maybe plenty of younger women coming in, because they might feel like their scarcity is being challenged. And so that's something that I think also senior women have to be aware of, that you might be forward thinking in a lot of ways and say that you want a lot of women in STEM and do a bunch of outreach. But then if you're tearing down other women, especially younger women engineers, you're not really walking the walk. So those are the two, I guess, comments I can say about that.
What about for younger engineers that are faced with these challenges? What ways can we maybe turn around the situation and maybe speak up if we need to, in a respectful and understanding way, coming from compassion? How can we basically turn that situation around and say, okay, I know this is your belief, but hear me out. This is what I believe right now, and this is my perspective, and kind of creating a consensus of coming together and understanding that there may be more than one solution for the same problem.
That's a great question, because in teams, typically, we like to think that people who bring diverse perspectives are innovative, and that's true. And sometimes we think we're completely welcoming because it means that a better solution will come around. And sometimes if you're challenged, sometimes as an underrepresented gender and a minority, I feel like when I am challenged, often I think it's because they have their own bias, and it's not that my idea actually isn't that good. So being able to check myself is really helpful. And if I'm speaking up in a team meeting for another woman, for example, if I say, oh, I agree with that because X, Y, Z, and really just be explicit in why I think their idea is worth delving into and why it's valid. And if I hear maybe quote unquote locker room talk, or if I hear anything being directed at someone um, that is disrespectful, a way to approach that, if they're so open saying something like that in a business setting, I typically will just keep it to myself and remember what it was. And if I know their project manager or their team manager, I'll say that just made me feel uncomfortable. Just something like that if I don't know them, just because it's harder to address a stranger than a friend. So if they tend to be a friend, I'll just go up to them myself and say, hey, that kind of made me uncomfortable. Um, and it's up to them to really change. You can't control everyone and their thoughts. So when we talk about diversity, sometimes it's hard to lose that aspect of economic value. Like there's value to having diverse perspectives. So if someone were to say, oh, that diverse perspective doesn't matter, it's actually all the data is pointing towards it does matter, and it might raise all of our incomes. So let's try to make sure that we're including diverse perspectives and we're not trying to shut them down. It seems against the whole idea of having an innovative team.
Yeah, and I think even for us as young engineers or people that may be in the diversity and inclusion environment all the time, it's really important to kind of check with ourselves and see if we're actually being inclusive with other people. Because a lot of times I feel like the more you're into diversity and inclusion, you kind of compartmentalize that thought into kind of different sectors. But at the end of the day, diversity and inclusion means including basically everyone and widen the spectrum. So I know myself, I need to check myself and kind of think deeply into if the actions that I'm doing and the way I'm thinking and expressing myself, it's being inclusive. Because the more you do it, the more numb you get to it, and it's harder to realize that you're not doing it. And kind of checking with yourself, it's super important. Um, I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions. I know we're kind of running out of time, but I just want to know what's the future of HeForSWE, and how do you see the organization growing in the future, as well as how do you see men becoming a bigger part of this mission of empowering women in engineering?
Oh gosh, it's so exciting to think of more diversity allies getting involved, and especially men, but anyone really being a diversity ally is important. So I have high hopes. But for HeForSWE in general, just after this first year of being an affinity group, we have a phenomenal set of new co-chairs coming in. Purva was a new co-chair, is coming in as a HeForSWE director from Drexel SWE. So we have that Temple Drexel thing going on with our collegiate experience. And then we have someone else coming in who is a more senior engineer, and he's very excited to be an advocate for women engineers. I would hope that HeForSWE would become I would hope that more collegiate sections decide to start programs. I would also hope for professional sections, but it's very grassroots. So I would really like to see a lot of college, collegiate sections and college students becoming ambassadors. And just, we'll see where affinity groups go. They're in general pretty new to Society of Women Engineers. So maybe one day we'll get our own web page on the blog, like a little page. Right now it's just Facebook, Instagram, social media. So hopefully it grows into something deeper with the society because it is so new. But all of the affinity groups, they provide really great community, locality, watering holes, I guess, for ideas and advancing the SWE mission. So I hope that they become a more prominent figure in the society.
Yeah, it's super important just to have groups like HeForSWE that are actually doing work to empower women engineering through men and through all these other people around engineering, and hopefully it creates enough awareness that it becomes natural and something that maybe we don't have to worry about in the future, hopefully. One last question I have for you, and this is a question I have asked everyone that comes to the podcast. I'm always fascinated by the answers, is how can we continue engineering our future?
Oh, That's a great question. Well, I think while we're seeing new public health concerns being raised, and we need to reimagine our built environment. I'm a civil by training, so that would be my answer. Just reimagining our built environment, and while we're also discussing that, there's an equity portion of that. It's not just realizing that now we need more space and we need green infrastructure. It's realizing that, if people at Temple University in particular, this is kind of getting into a long answer, but at Temple University in particular, there's this tunnel, and on the side there's stairs, on the side there's ramp. And I often see more people on the ramp than I do on the stairs. And I don't think a lot of people realize that this ramp is there by federal regulation. It's not just a convenient, it's not just a nice compliment. It's actually there for a reason. So while we're talking about reimagining our built environment, I would like to see in the future engineering solutions, innovative solutions for equity and accessibility, and a lot of people understanding that, an engineer made this to protect everyone, and that isn't just the average person. It's someone who might not be able to take the stairs, and you have to respect that. And along with that green infrastructure, but I always have my environmental flair, but realizing that there's accessibility in what we're designing for the future.
Yeah, definitely. Just always looking at the bigger picture, understanding that as engineers, we are helping build the future through including everyone in a society. We're not an engineer that's only working for a group of people. We're working for the entire society in general. So again, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. I'm very happy to learn more about HeForSWE and all the things you guys are doing. And I think it's very important, not only because there's a need for it, but it's always good to see that there is action towards that ultimate goal of empowering women engineering. And I think a group and just being vocal about it, it's always super important. So again, thank you so much for everything you're doing. And if anyone wants to connect with you, where can they find you? Where can they find HeForSWE online, or where can they reach out to you?
Oh, well, thank you for having me, first of all. And you are also a great example of a HeForSWE ambassador. So thank you for being you. They can find HeForSWE on Facebook. We have a private group at the moment. Hopefully we'll have something on the SWE website at some point. And we're also on Instagram. So check out our content. And if you have any reason to get involved, or if you have any interest, we'd love to have you. So thank you for having me, and thank you for looking up HeForSWE if you do.
Yeah, definitely. And do you manage those accounts, or where can people reach out to you directly? Maybe if they want to join or have specific questions about the organization.
That's a great question. I think SWE is coming out with a HeForSWE email, and we don't have a Gmail either right now. So it would just be my personal email. It would be catherine.m.martsolf@gmail.com.
Okay, I'll link all of that in the description below so people can find it super easy.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So there you have it. That's a conversation with Catherine today. She's doing some amazing work with HeForSWE. She has shared some amazing insight into what's like to be a young woman in engineering, especially when you attend these bigger conferences and these bigger events with a lot of men who may not have the open mind and the perspective that we hope we all have as engineers and just in general as members of society. And I think it was really powerful to hear from her how this one president from ASE a few years back kind of intercede for her, and I know that shouldn't be happening, but it was great to see that at least some men realized that what she was going through was not right. So I hope you got some value out of this episode. It's been fun to create this show and create this content, and I think this podcast was a great complement of the conversation with Danielle early on the podcast, which she's the center for the Society of Women Engineering, and we talk about how us as men can better empower other women in engineering. So thank you so much for coming to the podcast again. Thank you so much for subscribing and for all the feedback we've been receiving. And make sure you send this to someone, copy the link, text it to them, forward this episode wherever you're listening to this podcast. Make sure you check out the YouTube channel. We've been growing there, and it's been fun to create not only the audio version but the video version as well. Thank you so much for coming back to the episode. Thank you so much for all the feedback. The podcast is growing tremendously. And it's all thank you because of your feedback and me creating the content that is bringing value to you. As always, thank you, Jack Windows, for the music. I'll talk to you in the next one. But for now, let's continue engineering our future.